All right, are you ready for this? We're about to tackle one of the giants of philosophy today, David Hume. You ready?
Oh, yeah, bring it on. Hume is always a good time.
It's going to be a wild ride, I can tell you that already.
Yeah.
We're diving deep into his moral philosophy, and this guy, he really doesn't hold back. He questions everything we think we know about right and wrong, good and bad. We're going to be using excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on, well, you guessed it, Hume's moral philosophy.
This is going to be good. Hume is famous for just turning traditional ethics upside down.
Okay, so before we get too far, let's set the stage a little bit. Hume was writing in the 18th century, and back then, philosophers were having some pretty heated debates about, well, about where morality comes from.
Oh, yeah, the big questions.
Right. Some were saying it's all about reason, pure logic. Others were pointing to God, divine command. And then there were those who believed in this mysterious moral sense, like some kind of sixth sense for morality.
It was a wild time for ethical theories. Lots of different ideas floating around.
Yeah, so where does Hume fit into all of this? What was his take?
Well, Hume, he was all about experience, observing the world, looking at human nature. And based on his observations, he basically drops this bomb: reason alone, not enough for morality.
Wait, hold on. How can he just dismiss reason like that? Isn't logic, like, essential for figuring out what's right and wrong? I mean, that's what we use to make decisions, right?
That's where Hume's genius comes in. He's not saying reason is useless. It's more like it can't do the whole job on its own.
Okay, let's see. So reason isn't totally out of the picture.
Not at all. Think of it like this. Reason is like this brilliant advisor. It can give you the facts, lay out the options, show you the consequences, but it can't actually make you choose. It can't make you act.
So it's like a map, but not the driver. It shows you the routes, but it doesn't tell you where to go.
Exactly. Hume says it's our passions that ultimately steer us, our desires, emotions, those gut feelings. They're the fuel that powers our actions.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. But if it's all about feelings at the wheel, doesn't that make morality super subjective? Like, my feelings about something could be totally different from yours, and we'd both be right.
I can see why you'd think that, but Hume is more subtle than that. He's not saying morality is completely arbitrary.
So how does he avoid that whole anything goes problem?
Well, he points out that we all share certain basic sentiments. You know, we feel good when someone's kind to us, bad when we see suffering, those kind of universal feelings. And those shared sentiments, they form the foundation of our moral judgments. So it's not just about my random whims, it's about these deeper, more universal human experiences.
So like some kind of moral compass built into us, but it's tuned to our feelings, not just cold, hard logic.
Exactly. And to really drive this point home, Hume, he uses some pretty out there examples. He says, it's not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to scratching my finger.
Whoa, okay, that escalated quickly.
Right. I mean, nobody actually wants the world to end, right? But his point is, reason alone can't explain why we should care about anything, or anyone, for that matter. It's those feelings, that sympathy, that makes us value the well-being of others and, well, the whole world.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So reason takes a backseat to passions, to feelings. Got it. But then how do we actually make moral judgments? If it's not pure logic, then how do we decide what's right, what's wrong, what's a virtue, what's a vice?
This is where it gets even more interesting. Hume says it comes down to sentiment. Those gut feelings we get about certain actions or traits. We feel this sense of approval. It's almost like a pleasant sensation, right? When we see something that's agreeable, beneficial, either to ourselves or to others. And on the flip side, we feel disapproval, a kind of unease, when we encounter something that harms or hurts.
So you're saying if I see someone being super generous, that warm, fuzzy feeling I get is what makes generosity a virtue.
Exactly. It's not just about some abstract rule that says generosity good, selfishness bad. It's about that gut level feeling, that immediate sense of approval. And that feeling, that's what Hume calls sentiment.
Okay, sentiment equals moral judgment. Got it.
Yeah.
But hold on, isn't that still a bit too subjective? It's just about how I feel, right?
Well, Hume, he adds another layer to this. He brings in this idea of sympathy. It's like we can tap into what others are feeling, even if it's not happening to us directly. So if I see someone being kind to another person, I can feel that warmth, that positive energy, even though I'm not the one receiving the kindness.
So my moral judgments aren't just about my own personal whims. They're also shaped by my ability to connect with, to feel what others are feeling.
Precisely. It's like this internal scale we have, weighing the good vibes and the bad vibes of different actions. And Hume argues This scale, powered by sentiment and sympathy, that's what helps us make consistent moral judgments, even though, yeah, those judgments aren't based on pure logic.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. But before we go any further, I need to ask, what about reason? Does Hume just toss it out completely?
He doesn't throw it out entirely, but it definitely plays a different role than in traditional ethical theories.
So reason is still in the game, but maybe not the star player.
That's a good way to put it. Reason, it's still super important. It helps us grasp the facts of a situation, predict consequences. It can even help us fine-tune our sentiments. But ultimately, when it comes to the final decision, when we're deciding what's good, what's bad, what's virtuous, it's our feelings that have the last word.
Okay, so reason is like the advisor, the strategist, but our feelings are the commander, the one who ultimately decides which way to go.
Exactly. And Hume, he acknowledges that, yeah, our feelings can sometimes lead us astray, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I've made some decisions based on my feelings that I definitely regret.
We've all been there. But to counter this potential problem, this risk of just blindly following our emotions, Hume introduces this idea of what he calls the common point of view.
Common point of view. I'm intrigued. What is that?
It's basically like stepping outside of yourself, imagining you're not just one person with your own limited perspective, but that you can see things from multiple angles, consider everyone's feelings, not just your own. So instead of just reacting based on your immediate gut feeling, you're taking this broader, more impartial perspective.
So instead of just thinking, what do I want? It's
Yeah.
more like, what makes sense for everyone involved?
Exactly. And Hume argued that by shifting to this common point of view, we can actually correct for some of the biases and errors that might creep into our initial gut reactions.
Okay, this is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Hume is basically saying morality isn't this abstract, detached concept. It's deeply connected to our feelings, our ability to empathize with others. But wait, I have a question. He claims that every virtue, every good trait, has to have a non-moral motive at its core, right? But with justice, the only motive he seems to identify is the sense of justice itself. Isn't that circular?
You've hit on one of the most debated aspects of Hume's moral philosophy, that circularity problem with justice. It's something that's kept philosophers arguing for centuries.
So how do we get out of this philosophical merry-go-round? Did Hume offer any kind of solution?
Well, there are different ways to interpret what Hume might have been getting at here. Some argue that the non-moral motive for justice is actually self-interest.
So it all comes back to good old-fashioned self-preservation.
In a way, but it's not just about grabbing everything for ourselves. It's about understanding that having rules, respecting property rights, that this benefits everyone in the long run, including ourselves. It creates a stable society where we can all flourish.
It makes sense. If everyone's constantly stealing from each other, nobody wins.
Exactly. But of course, our individual self-interest might not always line up perfectly with acting justly in every single situation, right? So some argue that Hume relies on the idea that politicians, educators, they play a role in shaping our sense of justice. They cultivate that sense of fairness that goes beyond our immediate desires. They teach us to value justice for its own sake, for the well-being of society as a whole.
So it's like, through education and social norms, we learn to see justice as something valuable, even when it might require us to put our own selfish interests aside.
Precisely. And another interpretation is that Hume saw the sense of duty, that feeling of obligation to follow the rules of justice, as a kind of non-moral motive itself.
So it's not about the specific outcome of an action, but about the principle of upholding the rules, even when it's tough.
Exactly. That sense of duty could be a kind of, I don't know, like a pre-rational feeling, a deep-seated sense that compels us to act justly, even when our reasoning might lead us elsewhere.
Okay, so there's still debate about how exactly Hume escapes the circularity problem. But I think the main takeaway is that he's making a pretty bold claim.
Hmm.
Justice. It's not some natural God-given law.
Yeah.
It's something we humans created to solve very human problems.
Exactly. And that realization, that shift in perspective, is one of the most profound and maybe even a little unsettling aspects of Hume's moral philosophy.
All right, so we've talked about Hume's idea that reason isn't enough for morality, but I feel like we need to go deeper on that. It still seems kind of counterintuitive to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most radical and challenging aspects of Hume's philosophy, this idea that morality isn't ultimately based on logic or reason.
Right, like he famously said that reason is the slave of the passions. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, it's a classic Hume quote. It basically means that while reason can be a powerful tool, it can help us figure things out, it can't actually tell us what to want. Our desires, our emotions, those are the real driving forces behind our actions. Reason just helps us figure out how to get what we want.
Okay, so reason is like the advisor, the strategist, but our passions are the king, the one calling the shots.
Exactly. And when it comes to morality, Hume is saying that our moral judgments are ultimately rooted in those passions, those feelings. It's not about some cold, hard logic. It's about our sentiments, our gut reactions to things.
Okay, so I can see how our feelings play a role in our moral decisions, but aren't there also these universal moral principles that we should follow? Like don't lie, don't steal, those kind of things.
Yeah, those are definitely common moral principles. But Hume, he would argue that even those principles are ultimately grounded in our sentiments, not in some abstract realm of pure reason.
So you're saying even those basic don't do this, don't do that rules, those come from our feelings. How does that work?
Think about it like this. If someone lies to you, how does that make you feel?
Betrayed?
Yeah.
Hurt? Like I can't trust them?
Exactly. Those feelings of betrayal, those negative sentiments, there would give that rule, don't lie, its force. It's not just that reason tells us lying is bad, it's that we feel bad when we're lied to. And we can empathize with others who are being deceived.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it still feels like reason must have some role in our moral deliberations, right? Like I don't just go around doing whatever feels good in the moment. I think about things. I weigh my options.
Of course. Reason is still essential. Hume isn't saying we should throw reason out the window. He's saying it has a different role than what traditional philosophers thought.
So how does reason fit into the picture, according to Hume?
It helps us understand the facts of a situation, anticipate consequences. It can even help us refine our sentiments. But ultimately, it's those sentiments, those feelings, that tell us what's right and wrong.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Reason is important, but it's not the ultimate authority on morality. It's like it can give us the information we need, but it can't tell us what to do with that information. It's our feelings that make that final call.
Exactly. It's our feelings that motivate us to act. Reason can show us the path, but our passions are the fuel that drives us along that path.
Okay, that makes sense. But it still feels a little fuzzy to me. How do we know we're making the right moral judgments if it's all based on feelings? Like, what if my feelings are leading me astray?
That's a really important question, and Hume was aware of that challenge. He actually developed this idea of the common point of view to address that very concern.
Common point of view. Remind me what that is again.
It's basically like taking off your me-centered glasses and trying to see things from a broader perspective. It's about recognizing that our initial feelings might be biased by our own self-interest, our own limited experiences. So to make a more objective moral judgment, we need to step outside of ourselves and consider the feelings and perspectives of everyone involved.
So it's about empathy, about trying to see things from other people's shoes.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that ability to see things from a more impartial, more objective standpoint. Hume believed that by shifting to this common point of view, we can make more balanced and consistent moral judgments.
Okay, so it's not just about letting our emotions run wild. It's about trying to be more rational, more impartial, and how we apply those emotions to our moral decision-making.
Exactly. It's about using reason to help us refine and clarify those feelings, those sentiments that ultimately guide our moral choices.
This is all so thought-provoking. Hume is really giving us a whole new way to think about morality. But one thing I'm still grappling with is this idea that reason can't actually prove anything about morality. It can't give us those definitive answers about right and wrong. It feels like he's undermining the whole foundation of ethical reasoning.
That's one of the most challenging and controversial aspects of Hume's philosophy, is this idea he called the is-ought problem.
Is-ought problem. Okay, lay it on me.
Essentially, it's the idea that you can't logically derive an ought from an is, meaning you can't start with a statement about how the world is and then conclude a statement about how we ought to act.
Okay, I need an example. My brain is still trying to process all this.
Sure, let's say we observe that humans are naturally inclined to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's a fact, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious.
But can we logically conclude from that fact that we ought to always pursue pleasure and avoid pain? Like, is that a moral obligation?
I see your point. Just because something is a certain way doesn't automatically mean it should be that way. Like maybe there are times when we should endure pain for a greater good, even if it goes against our natural inclinations.
Exactly. Hume's is-ought problem highlights this gap between facts and values. We can't just jump from describing how things are to prescribing how they should be. It's a fundamental distinction that has huge implications for how we think about morality.
Okay, so we can't just use reason to figure out our moral obligations.
Yep.
Got it. But if it's not reason, then what is the basis of our moral judgments? How do we decide what's right and wrong?
This is where Hume's concept of sentiment takes center stage. He argues that our moral judgments are ultimately grounded in our feelings, those sentiments of approval and disapproval we were talking about earlier.
Right, so it's not about cold, hard logic. It's about our gut reactions, our emotional responses to things. But doesn't that make morality seem completely subjective? Like what I feel is right could be totally different from what you feel is right.
That's a common concern, but Hume didn't think morality was entirely relative or arbitrary. He argued that we all share certain fundamental sentiments that form the basis of a common morality.
So you're saying there are universal feelings that shape our moral judgments, like a shared human experience that informs our sense of right and wrong.
Exactly. We all feel a sense of pleasure when we witness acts of kindness and compassion, and we all feel a sense of pain and revulsion when we encounter cruelty and injustice. Those shared sentiments, those are the building blocks of our moral compass.
So it's not just about my individual whims or preferences. It's about tapping into those deeper shared human emotions that connect us all.
Exactly. And while our individual experiences might shape and refine those sentiments over time, Hume believed that there's a core set of moral feelings that are universal to human nature.
Okay, that makes sense. But if we're all operating from this shared set of moral sentiments, why is there still so much disagreement about what's right and wrong? Why are there so many different moral codes and beliefs across cultures and throughout history?
That's where Hume's idea of the common point of view comes into play. Remember, we talked about that.
Yeah.
It's about stepping outside our own limited perspectives and trying to see things from a more impartial, objective standpoint.
Yeah, it's like trying to see the bigger picture, taking into account the feelings and perspectives of everyone involved.
Precisely. And Hume believed that many of our moral disagreements stem from our failure to do that, our tendency to get stuck in our own limited viewpoints. He argued that if we can cultivate that ability to shift to the common point of view, if we can truly empathize with others and see things from their perspective, then we can start to bridge those divides and arrive at a more shared understanding of what's morally right and good.
Okay, so it's not just about blindly following our gut feelings. It's about using reason and empathy to refine those feelings and to make sure we're not just reacting based on our own limited biases and perspective.
Exactly. It's about engaging in a thoughtful and deliberate process of moral reasoning, one that takes into account the complexity of human emotions and the importance of considering the well-being of all. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into David Hume and his wild take on morality. We've covered a lot of ground passions, sentiments, virtues, you name it, but now I think it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture. What kind of impact did all these radical ideas actually have? How did Hume's thinking shape the world of philosophy?
Yeah, we've been so focused on the nuts and bolts of his arguments, it's easy to lose sight of his lasting influence. So how did Hume shake things up?
Well, for starters, he's often seen as one of the granddaddies of this theory called emotivism. It's this idea that, at their core, moral judgments are really just expressions of our feelings, not some objective truth out there in the universe.
So he basically shifted the whole conversation about morality away from pure reason and toward those messy human emotions.
Exactly. It was a huge departure from the traditional view, and that shift, well, it sent ripples through the philosophical world that are still being felt today.
Okay, so emotivism, that's one major branch of Hume's legacy. But his influence goes even wider.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Remember all that talk about sympathy and the common point of view? Hume's emphasis on those ideas that laid the groundwork for what we now call moral sentimentalism. It's this broader tradition in ethics that puts those emotional connections, those relationships we have, right at the heart of morality.
So it's not just about how I feel about something in isolation. It's about how those feelings are all tangled up with my relationships with other people.
Right. And that idea has been incredibly influential even up to the present day. You see contemporary philosophers, folks like Annette Bayer and Michael Sloat, they're building on those Humean insights, developing these really rich theories of morality that are all about empathy, care, the importance of community.
It's amazing to see how those threads of Hume's thought just keep weaving their way through the history of philosophy. But I'm curious, how did his ideas fare when they went head-to-head with those other big hitters, those major philosophical movements like Kantianism and utilitarianism?
Oh, that's a great question. You could say Hume's philosophy was kind of a philosophical rebel. It challenged both of those dominant schools of thought.
Okay, let's take them one at a time. Kantianism first. That's the theory developed by Immanuel Kant, right? The one that puts reason and universal moral principles on a pedestal.
Right. And Hume's view, with its focus on sentiment and the limits of reason, well, it really shook the foundations of that Kantian worldview.
It sounds like there were some major philosophical fireworks going off.
Oh, absolutely. Kant saw Hume's ideas as a serious threat because if morality was just about subjective feelings, then the whole idea of a universal moral law, it would just crumble.
So for Kant, reason was like the bedrock of morality, the only way to get to those objective, unbreakable moral truths.
Exactly. And he really pushed back against Hume's more sentimentalist approach.
Okay, so that's the Hume-Kant showdown. But what about utilitarianism? The whole greatest happiness for the greatest number idea. Did Hume have beef with that too?
Well, it's a bit more complicated with utilitarianism. On the one hand, Hume's emphasis on considering the well-being of others, that aligns pretty well with the utilitarian goal.
So they're both concerned with promoting happiness and minimizing suffering.
Yes, but Hume diverged from utilitarianism on a crucial point. He didn't buy this idea that we can just, calculate happiness and suffering like it's some simple math problem.
So not just adding up the pluses and minuses.
Right. For Hume, it always comes back to those sentiments, those feelings, even when we're thinking about consequences. Those consequences are always going to be filtered through our subjective experiences. We can't just erase the human element, the way we feel about things.
So for Hume, morality is always going to be more nuanced, more personal than what a straight-up utilitarian calculus can capture.
Exactly. He thought reducing ethics to a cold, hard formula, it just misses the complexity of our emotional lives, the way our feelings shape our moral decisions.
So we've seen how Hume throws down the gauntlet, takes on these philosophical heavyweights. He's pushing back against Kant, challenging utilitarianism, all while carving out his own unique path.
And you know what's remarkable? Even though he was writing centuries ago, his ideas are still so relevant today.
Totally. I mean, we're still grappling with these same fundamental questions about the nature of morality, the role of reason and emotions, what it means to live a good life. Hume's insights, they haven't lost any of their power.
I think that's a testament to how deeply he understood human nature. He wasn't just trying to build abstract philosophical systems. He was really trying to get to the heart of what makes us tick, how we make moral decisions, how we navigate this messy world of right and wrong.
Well, my friend, I think it's safe to say that our deep dive into the mind of David Hume has been a wild success. We've explored his radical ideas, those challenges to traditional morality, his enduring influence on the history of philosophy.
We've seen how his focus on human experience, on passion and sentiment, it shook things up, opened up new ways of thinking about ethics.
And as we resurface from this philosophical adventure, I hope our listeners are feeling a little bit more Humean themselves, a little more attuned to the power of their own emotions, the complexity of moral dilemmas, the importance of empathy and understanding in navigating this crazy world.
And remember, dear listener, the journey doesn't end here. Hume's work is full of these nuggets of wisdom, these insights that can really make you rethink your own assumptions about right and wrong. So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep that philosophical fire burning.
That's right. Until next time, happy pondering.